So I'm going to start by juxtaposing what I call the old world and the new world. So by the old world, I mean the situation where you make a film and then you make a deal and you give all the rights to a single distributor, and then he or she is responsible for the future of your movie, and you have little or no input in what happens to your film. So in that situation, the distributor's in control. And by an overall deal, I mean you give that distributor all your rights, not just some of them. There's usually kind of a fixed release plan. They kind of take a similar approach to all their movies, which is essentially throwing it against the wall and seeing if it sticks. If it sticks, they'll support it some more, and if it doesn't stick, they won't support it, but they won't give it back to you either. A lot of these distributors are focused on a mass audience. Costs of distribution are rising. And your access is not directly to audience. You're connecting through the distributor to an audience in some ways. Distribution is territory by territory. So basically, they'll sell rights to France or rights to Germany or rights to China. And all the revenues are cross-collateralized, which means that all the revenues go into a pot and all the expenses go into a pot, and then the revenues magically shrink and maybe no revenues come to you. So that's not what you like. And their attitude to consumers is basically they're couch potatoes. They have to lure off the couch into a theater. So juxtapose that with the new world. So in the new world, there's a way for you to be in control of your distribution. And I'm going to talk about what that means. It's a hybrid approach. So hybrid distribution is a situation where you're splitting your rights among distributors. You're not giving all your rights to one distributor. And you're keeping some rights yourselves. And that right, for sure, is the right to sell the film directly from your website, both digitally and on DVD. There's no fixed strategy that every film follows. Each film can have its own strategy. You're interested in core audiences. So core audiences are existing, like niche audiences that are going to be really interested in your content. And then if you succeed with those niche audiences, you can cross over to reach a larger audience, a more general audience. The costs of distribution this way are lower. You have direct access to viewers, which is one of the biggest differences between the old world and the new world. And you have direct access to them online. And you are selling directly to some of them, and in other cases, distributors are selling to them. Your approach is not thinking about distribution country by country, but thinking about how you can distribute a movie globally, which is a big difference. There's separate revenue streams coming from different distributors, so they're not all cross-collateralized. And we don't want you to have anonymous consumers to deal with. We want you to have true fans as filmmakers. So that's the sort of overview. I know that's a lot, and I went by it fast, but I'm going to illustrate these things as we go. So I'm going to talk about making a strategy. My belief is that every film needs its own distribution strategy. A strategy that's customized to the content of the movie, to the core audiences, to the goals of the filmmaker, to the avenues of distribution. And it's very, very important that we're not talking about formulaic distribution where every film is distributed the same way, but we're talking about distribution where each film has its own strategy. I'll talk about avenues of distribution, the sequence of your different distribution windows, which is really important for you to understand. I'm talking about how you build a team of people to work with you. Every filmmaker needs not just a strategy, but a team of people to help her or him. I'll talk about core audiences and marketing partners and sales. So I'm going to start with the US, and I'm going to juxtapose this to international distribution. And one rule for you to remember is that if a distribution company is good at international distribution, as in countries around the world, they are not good at US distribution. And if they're good at US distribution, they are not good at international distribution. So traditionally, the first avenue of distribution, and I think of it as an avenue, is film festivals. But what I would say is that in general, film festivals are overrated as being key to your distribution. There are a few festivals that matter a lot, and then a lot of other film festivals that matter hardly at all. So in North America, there are 2 film festivals that are really important, Toronto and Sundance. That's the A list. There's no B list, because those 2 festivals are so much more important than all the other festivals. So let's get down to the C list. So on the C list, you have Telluride, Tribeca, South by Southwest. After Tribeca, South by Southwest. Which one? Telluride. Yeah, Telluride may be closer, a little higher than those few. But it's great to go to festivals, and I wish you all lots of laurel leaves, that you can put on your video box or your website. But fundamentally, they're not going to have much to do with your distribution, even though that's how it used to be, maybe more. But something for documentary filmmakers that they don't understand the importance of, and that's become really important, are showing your film at conferences. So think about the difference between festivals and conferences. Most film festivals are local events. Again, there are some exceptions, like Cannes and Berlin and the International Documentary Festival in Amsterdam and Sundance in Toronto. But the other ones are mostly local. So, Tribeca is in New York, South by Southwest is in Austin, Telluride's in Telluride. And they have a local audience, and they show this kind of odd conglomeration of movies. The movies aren't really connected in any way in terms of content. Now juxtapose a local film festival with a national conference or an international conference where people are coming together across the country, from around the world, around a certain set of issues. So if you're making a documentary and the issues that they're coming together about include what your film's about, then that's a core audience. And those people are in a position, if they like your movie, if they get excited about it, to let everybody else know in their core audience about your film. So that's tremendous value. There's an example of a film that opened in, maybe 4 years ago. And it was about women coming back from war in the Middle East who had been supporting US soldiers. They weren't soldiers themselves. And they had no access to health care because they weren't soldiers. So the film won a big award at Tribeca, which I think had no impact on its distribution whatsoever. But then there was a conference in DC of the 500 people in the US most involved with women's health care after war. The opening night, the film was shown, and in the 90 minutes or hour and a half, 2 hours that it was shown with the Q&A, the future of that film was assured, because the people that saw the movie, liked the movie, were going to use the movie, were going to tell other people about the movie, and it was going to have distribution for years to come. And that's an example of how conferences can help you. I can give you plenty of other examples. Now, conferences are hard work. They don't have a simple application process. They're not about showing movies. They plan their agendas far in advance. But if you can look forward and anticipate those conferences, approach those organizations, and they can show all of your movie or part of your movie, or you could be on a panel, that can really, really make a difference in your distribution. Okay, then there's theatrical distribution, which you all know about. So from the standpoint of documentaries, in the US, theatrical distribution is mostly pretty pathetic right now. You can have a movie in theaters, you just can't have audiences, because people have stopped going in the US to see documentaries in theaters for the most part. There are a few exceptions. So often when I talk to filmmakers about making a strategy for their films, I say, okay, maybe you should be thinking about playing a 1 week in one city, which could be New York, because that's where a lot of the press is, and you can get reviews and get some word of mouth. And then everywhere else, I don't want you to run for a week to an empty theater. I'd rather you did a single screening. And that screening can be a special event. You could be there with the film, or somebody in your film could be there, or you could Skype in, or you could have local experts. And the difference between a special event and being in a movie theater for a week is, at least from my standpoint, a movie comes to Los Angeles, where I live. I know it's going to be there for a week, and I say, I want to see that movie. But somehow the week goes by and I never get to see that movie. But if it's coming and it's only there Tuesday night at 7:30, it's my one chance to see the movie. It's a special event. The filmmaker's going to be there. I get there Tuesday night, or I know I'm not going to see the movie. So the difference between having a special event and just being one of 9 films playing in a multiplex for a week is huge. Okay, so then after theatrical is what I call semi-theatrical. Now semi-theatrical, these are special event screenings of films, mostly nonfiction now, not features, outside of theaters. So they could be on campuses, they could be in museums, they could be in libraries. There's a lot of places they could be. And some films, some documentaries that I've worked on have had as many as 500 special event screenings around the US. And those screenings were huge in building awareness of the film. Your challenge as filmmakers is to reach a critical level of awareness. However good your movie is, if there's no awareness, you're going to have a disappointing distribution. And if your movie's not that good, but you have a lot of awareness, maybe your distribution won't be so bad. So you're always trying to get to a level of awareness, and semi-theatrical screenings can make a big difference. Now, the next thing is I call institutional sales. Institutional sales used to be educational distribution, where people were selling copies to colleges and universities, and to some extent high schools. But educational distribution has gotten a little bit worse, but what's grown is people are selling copies to NGOs, to government bodies, to different partners, and those sales, together with educational sales, have gotten to be really significant. And in some cases, the revenues from educational, institutional sales are greater than any other source of revenue in the life of a documentary. So some filmmakers skip over this because they think it's not meaningful anymore. But the films that I'm working on, that's where they've had amazing success. So that should be part of your strategy to see how you can make that work. And in the past, educational distributors would either rent a movie for a screening or they'd sell a film at the same time. But I don't believe that's the right way to do it. I think you should have a screening only period first before you start educational sales. And you should have an educational sales period before you start consumer sales. Because educational copies are selling for $300, $350. So if your movie's available for $19 for consumers, then there are not going to be a lot of educational sales at $350. And then we get to TVOD, which is transactional video on demand. And what that means is somebody is buying your film or renting your film to watch a screening. And so that's iTunes, Amazon, etc. And then SVOD, which is subscription video on demand. So that means it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hulu. And then there's direct digital, where filmmakers are making the movie available digitally directly from their website. There's retail DVD, which is getting smaller and smaller, but still significant for many documentaries. And there's direct DVD, where you're selling the DVD directly from your website. So this is complicated, but when you make a strategy, I want you to have a strategy for each window of distribution, and I want you to go step by step through the windows. I don't want you to do these things simultaneously. So in terms of international avenues of distribution, we can leave out some of those others. For example, institutional distribution isn't really significant in most territories. So there's festivals, theatrical, television, TVOD and SVOD, direct digital and DVD. Okay, here's the big problem with traditional distribution. Distributors are looking backwards. They're looking at the way things used to be, hoping somehow they can breathe life into models that are no longer true. And there's many cases where I've come across distributors and I'd say, well, what new things are you doing digitally or on other fronts? And they'll say, well, we're not doing anything that we haven't been doing for 10 years. And then I think of dinosaurs headed on their way to extinction. So here you are thinking about your distribution and what routes to take. And I'm going to start by showing you, this is a feature film made probably about 2003, 2004. And it's a feature set in the world of high school wrestling. And the filmmaker shot it on a 35, started distributing it theatrically in the US, and it was costing him as much money to distribute it as he was making. So he said, okay, I'm going to start selling it out of my garage on DVD. So he hired 2 interns. And he said, okay, I want you to figure out who the core audiences for the movie are. So it was high school wrestling people, college wrestling people, and Olympic wrestling people, not professional wrestling. That's a whole different crowd. And he said, I want you to go online and connect with websites related to these core audiences. So they identified 400 websites that had to do with those levels of wrestling. And pretty soon, selling DVDs directly from his website, he'd sold 20,000 DVDs to those people just directly. And then he kept going, went to some tournaments, wrestling tournaments, and eventually I think sold 70,000 DVDs. So the difference between selling directly and selling through a third party is that you're making, in his case, he was probably making about, let's say it cost him $5 to make the DVD and ship the DVD. He was selling them for $30. He was making $25 a DVD. And if he was selling them through a distributor, he might have been making $2 a DVD. So he was making 10 times as much money per sale, selling directly. And more important, he got the names and email addresses of everybody who bought directly from him, which meant he could stay in touch with those people. He could add them to the core audience of the film that he was reaching out to. And the film was incredibly successful. So this was one of the earliest examples of what I call hybrid distribution, where you're splitting your rights, and mostly the success he had was going directly. Okay, so let's think about audience for a minute. So in the old world, audience comes last. People make a film, work on it for a long time, and then at the end of the process, just before it's about to open, they think about who the audience is and how they're going to reach them. As I talked about before, middlemen are in control of access to that audience, not filmmakers. The audience is basically anonymous and unreachable. A lot of Hollywood studios think in terms of macro audiences, so they'll talk about quadrants: older males, younger males, older females, younger females. That's the most pathetic definition of audience I could think of. And it's about, I don't know, 30 years old, and people are still thinking that way. I don't think it really relates to distribution anymore. That audience is often reached through advertising with very formulaic campaigns and the passive consumers I talked about before. So in the new world of audience, I want you to be thinking about audience from the very beginning, before you make the movie. In fact, the morning you think up the idea for your film in the shower, that's when I want you to be thinking about that audience and how you're going to reach them. And I want you to be reaching out to that audience before you're making the movie, while you're making the movie, while you're in post-production, not just waiting until the very end. And along the way, as you reach out to that audience, you can kind of test the audience and figure out which audiences are going to be most excited about your film, how you can present the movie to them, either describing it or with a trailer, and how you can, iterate that process and just get better at it. So by the time the film's done, there'll be people that'll be excited about seeing your movie. If you have direct access to audience, then they're identifiable and reachable. You have the names and email addresses of people that you can go to when you want. Maybe they're subscribed, maybe they're connected to you on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Instead of thinking in macro approaches to audience, I think you should think in micro approaches to audience, which is very specific core audiences. I'm going to give you examples of that in a second. Instead of paid advertising, the audiences can be reached through social media much more affordably and much more efficiently. And as I want you to have a customized audience strategy, and I want you to think about your audience as potentially active supporters or patrons of you as a passionate filmmaker. And I want you to be able to take that audience with you to the next films you make. Now, sometimes when I'm talking with filmmakers around the world, I say there's only one reason to be an independent filmmaker today. And then I stop and I look around the room and I think, what do people think I'm going to say next? Anybody have an idea of what that one reason could be? Tell stories, okay. Other ideas?
Stay independent.
What?
Stay independent.
Stay independent. Okay, what I would say is because you can't help yourself. Because if you were thinking of a rational career without a lot of craziness and uncertainty, you wouldn't be making independent films. But if you can't help yourself, then my job as a distribution strategist is to help you increase the chances that you can have a sustainable career. So I want you to have active supporters that you can take with you film to film. Okay, so here's an example of core audiences. This is a film called Note by Note, a documentary about the making of a Steinway piano. That might sound kind of boring, but it's a fabulous movie, regardless of whether you're interested in pianos. And so at one point, I asked the filmmaker to make a chart of his audience ecosystem. Maybe we can turn the lights down on this one, too. Okay, so up top, we have Steinway dealers. That's kind of obvious. Steinway owners, that's obvious. Piano students and their parents, that's sort of obvious. My favorite, it's hard to read, second down on the left is piano technicians. Piano technicians, in this case, are piano tuners. So the filmmaker figured out that in the US, there's a national organization of piano tuners, and they get together once a year and they have a convention. So he got to show the movie to 750 piano tuners. They loved his movie, and ever since, they've been telling the people whose pianos they tune about Note by Note. That's a kind of killer core audience, that it's word of mouth, person to person. It's not paid advertising. So every film, every documentary in particular, has an opportunity to think about what an audience ecosystem for their film could be and to test it. So in this situation, you're not going to the piano tuners through advertising. You're going to them directly, and you're showing them the movie. And if they like the film, then they're going to talk to other people. So here's another example. It's a film called American Meat about organic meat growing. And what I like about this map is that the filmmaker used color, shape, and size to show the different core audiences. And as he tested his core audiences, he would modify the diagram. And he did extremely well reaching out to his audiences. Okay, I said a little bit about this before, but I want to just say a little bit more. So how educational distribution has changed and has become what I call institutional distribution. There's some films that I've been involved with that have made more than $500,000 from educational distribution, a single film. And that so dwarfs the money they made from television or from consumer distribution or from theatrical distribution. So I think for all documentary filmmakers to really understand the educational/institutional distribution opportunities for their film is crucial. And to create a window, which would be at least 6 months in terms of educational sales before consumer sales, where you can maximize it. Now, in the old days of educational distribution, distributors had customers, and then they put it in their catalog and they made it available to those customers. That doesn't work anymore. So basically, for each film, you have to think about who the core audiences are and how can you reach those core audiences, even if they're not your customers, because probably most of them aren't. So that could be partnerships with organizations, that could be showing at conventions, that could be putting on free screenings virtually for all the members of an organization. That's one of the new things that people are doing. So let's say there's a national organization and you think that organization, national organization in the US, and you think that organization might be really interested in your film. So you say to the organization, we'll make the film available on Vimeo for free for a weekend, and all your members can watch it for free. And then after that, if those members want to buy the film, use the film for training or education, they can do that. But first you've exposed it to them, and then they can spread the word among that audience effectively. So we don't need to spend more time on this now, but I just wanted you to kind of see how different things are today. The old model was reactive. You put a film in your catalog and you hope some people called you to rent it or buy it. The new model is proactive, where you reach out to those people directly and their organizations and sell it that way. Okay, now this is a film about dyslexia that I consulted on. And it premiered at Sundance, and then we started our distribution from there. And in the U.S., the estimates are somewhere between 15 to 20% of people are dyslexic, have some problem with reading, but it's not a well-known condition, and it's always seen as a kind of disability. But it turns out that a lot of dyslexic people have abilities beyond non-dyslexic people. For example, dyslexic astronomers have a better way of seeing the whole picture than non-dyslexic astronomers. So a lot of the really talented people, successful people, are dyslexic. So this is a documentary about that. So it was a film where we started out with a core audience of people who were dyslexic and families that had dyslexia, and organizations that were involved with it, and then doctors and social workers and psychologists who work with those folks. And as we went, it got, those audiences grew and grew and grew, and it crossed over to people that had never heard of the dyslexia before. But again, it's starting with a very specific idea of a core audience and working from there. Okay, then one more example. It's a film called Girl Rising, about the importance of girls' education around the world. So what they did was very innovative in terms of their distribution. Instead of having regular theatrical distribution, they crowdsourced their theatrical distribution, which meant that they created a situation where if 75 people in one city wanted to see the movie, they would commit to that, buy a ticket in advance, and then there'd be one screening in a movie theater. And so I think they made a couple $1 million just from getting people to come together and watch screenings and discuss the subject of girls' education. Then the film did very, very well in educational/institutional distribution, and it's done, pretty well in consumer distribution, and it's been distributed around the world. So that was a really good example. Okay, so let me just run through some what I call the 10 principles of hybrid distribution, which I've touched on. So the first one is to design a strategy customized to your movie. The next one is to split distribution rights. So plan A should be splitting your rights, and plan B should be giving all your rights to one distributor. The third one is to choose good distribution partners, which means doing due diligence on the distributors that say they're interested in your movie, and finding out from other filmmakers who have worked with those people how good a job they've done with their films. Then to limit the rights you give people to rights that they're actually good at. So often distributors get given more rights than they're good at or that they care about. And once you give that right away and nothing happens with it, then that right is essentially lost forever. It's very important to negotiate win-win deals that are benefiting you really and the distributor. Retaining the rights to sell directly, I think, is absolutely key. Building a distribution team. I talked a little bit about that before. So who's on your distribution team? It could be certain distribution partners. It could be somebody that can help you make screenings happen of the film around the country. Could be somebody that can help you with social media, help you design a website that's effective. Somebody that can help you find partners, organizational partners that can really make a difference in your distribution. So you absolutely need teammates, and you need some money to cash flow your distribution. You can't do it with no resources. Partnering with nonprofits and online communities, we can talk more about that if you'd like in the Q&A. Maximize direct revenues. That's really, really important. And then you want to grow and nurture that audience and take them with you to other films. Here's a film called Down to Earth, which did conventional distribution in France and was unsuccessful. The filmmakers are Dutch, living in the UK. But when they did it in the Netherlands, they decided they were going to create screening events, discussion events, and people would come and see the movie, and then they come back and see it again with their families and with other people. And I think it's the most successful documentary distribution in the Netherlands ever. And now they're about to take that model to the UK. These quick slides from posters are films that got theatrical distribution in the United States one night at a time, not running week runs. There were big enough core audiences that, and this film, the Beatles film, they were doing single screenings, and so many people responded that they made almost $3 million just from those single special event screenings. Documentaries have built-in core audiences. I have a core audience computer embedded in my brain. I don't know when it happened, but I'll talk to filmmakers, and I'll ask them about their core audiences, and they'll say, you know, A, B, and C. And I'll go, what about X, Y, and Z? I mean, I've never heard of them before. They've been working on it for 4 years. And often I'll be suggesting audiences that they've never thought of that actually are turning out to be really important in their distribution. Interestingly, with documentaries, you can make a film that critics don't like, but your core audiences like, and be very successful. So critics do not have the same impact on nonfiction that they have on fiction. Same with film festivals. You can make a film that goes to no film festivals. There's a film called Forks Over Knives. How many of you know Forks Over Knives? Anybody? It's a film. Oh, there's one person. It's a film about a plant-based lifestyle, a kind of vegan program. When they were editing the movie, they were doing test screenings. They did over 20 test screenings while they were editing. So they'd cut the movie, show it to a group of strangers, make changes based on that screening, then show it to another group of strangers. And in the end, they had the film. The film has been phenomenally successful. I can't even tell you how successful. I think 4 years after it started distribution, it was the #1 selling documentary on Amazon in the US. And I think it's because of what they learned in those test screenings, and those audiences found the movie just irresistible. And they would buy it and they would tell other people about it. So I think that kind of core audience loyalty makes a huge difference. Then obviously a lot of documentaries have urgency about them, and depending on what issues they're about. And finally, you know, they can give you as a filmmaker the opportunity to change the world. Okay, so direct revenue is selling it off your website. There's no middleman or middlewomen between you and the money. All the money is coming to you. I mean, there may be a company that's facilitating the digital distribution. Maybe they got a little fee for that, but it's all your money. And you're always going to make, it could be DVDs or a download or a stream, or it could be related materials. But any sale that would be made through a third party, a distributor, you're always going to make less. And the value of the customer information, the name and email address, in many cases is going to be more valuable to you, greater to you than the value of the money. Because I know this will sound like a boring term, customer data, but having that information is so important to you in terms of, you know, a continued career. If you ask me what correlates with sustainable career, I know sustainable career is kind of utopian idea for a documentary filmmaker, but it's the size of your personal core audience. So, you know, you can start with 10 people or 50 people, and over time, I want you to keep, am I cutting out here? I want you to keep building that audience. So I believe in mailing lists. A lot of people think they're passé, but being able to go to people when you want to go to them, not just posting it on your Facebook page and chronologically it disappears off the bottom pretty soon, but reaching out to those people is so important. So here's the trick of an effective mailing list. Figuring out what you can send to people that they want to receive, which does not include boring updates, which does not include relentless self-promotion. So in some cases, let's say you're making a film with gorgeous images, you could send them a still a month. That's it for a while. You don't have to send them just stills, but that's what you could do. Say it's a music-driven film, you could send them some music once a month. Let's say it's a film, this one now, back here, okay. You could send them information about food. It could be recipes, it could be some kind of new nutritional information, and they'll want it. If they want it, they'll read the email. And I think so often you get on mailing lists and each thing they send you, you're not interested in. There was one short filmmaker, he would send me an email about every short film festival he got into that I'd never heard of. And at one point I just wrote him an email and said, please stop. This is not helping your case with me. So think about what you can send people that they like, and you can test it. You can see how people respond, what percentage of people open your email. So I think that personal core audience is really important. So another question?
You mentioned the advantage of distributing a documentary. Why it's better to make a documentary than making a fiction feature. So how do you find, in your career, when you help to distribute a fiction feature, how do you find the big difference? What's the big difference?
Well, to start with fiction films, festivals are really important. I'm sure there are examples of fiction films that have gotten distribution that have never gone to festivals, and so if you make another zombie film or whatever, I'm sure that you don't necessarily need festivals. But for, you know, kind of serious narrative films, film festivals are really, really important. So to start with, and film festivals are really arbitrary in their selection process. To say ridiculous would be probably a better word. And so you have to make it through the kind of funnel of those festival screeners to be at a festival. Okay, then once you're at a festival, can you get any reviews? Can you get any response? Can you interested in anybody in the movie? So when people come to me and ask me to help them with distribution strategies, I only agree to consult if I think I can make a meaningful difference. And so when it's a fiction filmmaker, the answer is usually no, because I can't tell them things that they can do that are going to really increase their chances of getting into a festival or doing well at a festival or even, you know, making a better movie. Whereas with documentary filmmakers, there's all sorts of steps that I can help them with and all sorts of mistakes that I can help them avoid. You're making a documentary, I want you to reach out to those NGOs while you're making the film. Your chances of getting them on board are much greater if it's while you're making the film because they think you're looking for a real partner. You're not going to let them edit the movie. But if you wait till the film is done, they're not thinking you're really looking for a partner. And that win-win situation where people are partnering, which is how I want you to work with distributors as well as with NGOs or whatever, is really crucial to that. And NGOs are not going to give you money to make your movie, but they can give you in kind. They can connect you with their membership. They can support the movie in a variety of ways that can benefit them. They could be showing your film do screenings as fundraisers for their local chapters. There's a lot of ways they could benefit from your movie. Okay?
So in your work and in your experience, is the industry starting to capture impact other than income from, other than monetary income? Thanks.
Well, okay, so I didn't talk about goals. So when a filmmaker calls me, the first thing I say is, what's your ultimate goal in making the movie? And I give them 3 choices. There may be more, but I give them 3. Maybe they'll have another one. I say maximizing revenue, maximizing career, or maximizing impact. Those can all be goals, but I want you to prioritize what's most important ultimately for you. And by the way, saying I want as many people to see my movie as possible, that's not a goal, that's a means to an end. And I want to know what the end is. Are you trying to change the world? Are you trying to, raise your profile? What are you trying to do? So rarely, when I talk to filmmakers for the first time, can they answer that question. So they want to do all those things. They go away and they think about it, and then they come back and they say, okay, well, what we really want to do is maximize our career. Okay, fine. That creates a framework for decision making as you go along the way and have lots of choices. Or if maximizing impact is your goal, then again, you got a clear framework when there's a choice to be made. Some of the films that I've worked on that are the most rewarding are films where it's about impact. They don't care about, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. They don't care about making another movie ever necessarily. They're not that concerned about revenue. They just want to change how people see the world. And a lot of times, if you do that right, then that will bring revenue too, and it will give them career opportunities. But being clear about goals is so crucial. I think that there's qualitative and quantitative ways to measure goals. Most of the quantitative ways are a complete joke to me. So, when filmmakers say, well, I did 20 screenings that averaged 20 people. That's how they define their impact. I'm like, sometimes the real impact, you can see it more in this sort of qualitative way. It's not easy to do a survey or have a number, but you can see now people are talking about this issue, or now more organizations have made it a priority, or politicians are starting to pay attention. So it's a little more complicated. There's a distribution bulletin that I wrote about a couple movies, End of the Line, which is about overfishing, and all the things they did to have an impact. So it's a kind of, there's people out there that specialize in impact, and I always bring a little skepticism if that's what they're doing on a professional basis, and they have lots of charts and graphs and online presentations. But for a lot of filmmakers, the passion with which they make the movie is why they're making the movie. And I think it's very important in your emails, on your website, in your bulletins to your mailing list, to give a sense of the passion with which you're doing your work, so that people will want to support you as a person, a passionate filmmaker. Okay?
I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on online streaming platforms like Netflix, which you touched on?
Well, Netflix has changed so much in the last 10 minutes, let alone the last few years. So basically, right now, Netflix is not acquiring independent documentaries. They're putting all their money in creating original content. Now, sometimes it's a little unclear, because they could acquire something and say it's an original when they didn't really make it, but they want to promote it that way. So they are doing some acquisition. So the thing about Netflix the other thing that's interesting about Netflix is Netflix understands global distribution better than any of its competitors. So the old Hollywood studios are still territory by territory. We're doing this, we're doing that, whatever. And Netflix wants to make stuff available to all its subscribers worldwide, at the same time. And I think that if you look forward and you say, what's changing with distribution, it's becoming global faster than most companies understand, and documentary filmmakers are in the front of this. So fiction filmmakers are like kind of way lagging somewhere behind. But I think that if you really think about the fact that on the one hand, you can have a sales agent that can make deals, say in 10 or 12 countries for your film. That leaves over 170 countries where nobody has access to your movie. So if you have the ability to make it available to people in those 170 countries, then your movie is available worldwide. So then for you, the challenge is, how do you market online? And that's a whole different kettle of fish than buying paid advertising territory by territory. So I think if you think about how core audiences operate internationally, and we were discussing this at lunch, so let's say you have a niche audience that's not that big in Hong Kong and Argentina and wherever, but if you aggregate that niche audience over all the territories where it lives, it gets the critical mass. So I think that's thinking about global distribution in a way where you can aggregate core audiences regardless of where people live, and have enough people buying the movie, renting the movie, whatever, that it's a sustainable model. So I'm not scared about the fact that it's a niche. If there's an audience out there that is really going to be interested in your movie and excited about it and support it and spread the word about it, then let's think about what worldwide that can add up to. And then once we reach those audiences effectively, can we use them as a base to cross over to other audiences? But I really want you to have a starting point. So the other thing about Netflix is that if you make a Netflix deal, educational distribution, as I talked about, or institutional distribution kind of goes away. Netflix is basically, the only way the movie's going to be out there. So there are films that I know about. They had a whole model of how they were going to distribute the movie and all the stages and all the partners. Then Netflix made them an offer. And that was like, okay, well, we'll just take the offer. And so all those opportunities for impact and partnerships and change over time went away because the filmmakers had no control of the movie anymore, and Netflix wouldn't let them do those other forms of distribution. So there certainly are cases where you could get a Netflix offer, and I would recommend that you turn it down. That may sound crazy, but there are situations like that. And now other companies like Amazon, YouTube Red, Hulu, are thinking about how to make global distribution work. Whereas the regular studios, Hollywood studios, are just sitting around doing the same old thing, which is basically now the same new thing, which was make 20 Avengers movies or Marvel movies. So what's interesting about the studios shifting into a franchise film model where they're not interested in making quality dramas in a kind of middle budget range. They're only interested in making superhero movies or low budget horror movies or comedies. So that leaves a whole set of audiences that aren't getting things that you could actually be making. So then it's thinking about how you can reach those audiences that are being left behind by the conventional powers that were. So this is the spectrum of independence. And you can think about where you are from totally dependent on the one end to truly independent on the other. And the idea is, how can you become more independent or less dependent, depending on how you think of it. Okay, so these are the ways that having a personal audience can increase your independence. So the first one is funding. And I didn't talk much about crowdfunding. If there's time, I can say a little bit about it, but these are just some examples you know about. Then there's revenues. So you have a personal audience. They can obviously buy things from you. You can do pre-sales. You can, they can buy tickets for your screenings. Then these are the things ways they can help you with marketing. So they can share teasers, trailers, or links. They can blog and post and tweet about your movie. They can do reviews and they can do ratings. So they can rate the movie on IMDb or Amazon or places like that. And those things really matter. So, oops, sorry. Let me go back. Okay, so crowdsourcing. These are the things that they can contribute to you. You know, ideas, crew, music, some great content for your website, and translations. There's one documentary, I'm trying to remember the title of it since lunch. I still wasn't thinking of it then, about video games. And they crowdsourced translations, made the film available digitally, 25 languages. And all those were contributed by people in that country. It's about independent video games. I'll think of the name of it in a second. Anyways, crowdsourcing translations can be fabulous. Then these are the things that you can get feedback on from your core personal audience. So they can respond to trailers and teasers, they can look at scenes, they can respond to your music and your poster. So it's kind of like doing test screenings, in a way. And these are connections that audience can bring you. So they can connect you to funders and partners, sponsors, donors, investors, websites, mailing lists. The last thing I want to say is that I've talked a lot about change, but things are really, there's more opportunities for you as independent filmmakers today than there have ever been. I'm not saying it's easy. It's harder to bring a film into the world than it is to make one in the first place. But you have opportunities that weren't there. And so I encourage you to recognize, you know, the opportunities that you have, to find teammates that can help you. And if you can't help yourselves and you just want to continue being independent filmmakers, I wish you all sorts of luck. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.